All right, we are live and welcome everybody. We'll give a few minutes for some people to come in here, but welcome to the first week of the Workplace Wanderer. I'm super excited. My partner, Amanda Marino with Next Level Recovery Associates, had this idea of why don't I do a LinkedIn Live each week and discuss more workplace related issues. And I was so excited when she brought that idea to me because she's been doing a LinkedIn Live for a while and interviewing people in the mental health field. And I was happy when she brought this idea to me. It was something this is an area that I feel very passionate about. I feel it's very important to address a lot of these topics, specifically in the workplace. It still seems a little bit taboo, and we're seeing the workplace pretty much around the country and probably the world really lagging behind in terms of taking care of their employees and not very understanding or educated when it comes to the importance of creating a culture that caters to employees today and how much it really can benefit them and the productivity of the organization and everything. So I was really excited to jump on here. And as I was telling Ashley, which I'll introduce in a second here, as I was telling Ashley prior to us starting the stream, this topic is, it's a little bit scary to me how people are not paying attention to this. And there's some organizations now that are really cutting a lot of the wellness, the culture, the DEI type of work that they're doing in order to save a buck and kind of win the quarter. So doing these types of conversations, the hope is we can all learn something. And that brings me to my stance on, as the workplace wanderer, my job is to wonder. And I want to ask questions and learn. And so my goal here is to not necessarily be the expert, but to talk to the experts and ask the experts where their passion lies, what information do they have for us, and what are some simple and practical tips, techniques, different things that workplaces can implement to help improve the culture overall. So that brings me to the first guest, someone who I've been going back and forth in LinkedIn Messenger for a very long time. Someone I look up to very much is Ashley Grimes, who is, first, I'm going to talk about NAMI just because she is the president of NAMI Florida, and that's really how I got to know her and how we got connected. But since then, she has presented so much information to me and so many different topics pertaining to workplace mental health. And you were the first person I thought of when we decided to do this, and I'm really excited to bring you on. So thank you so much for coming on.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here, as a person in long-term recovery. I know that 70% of people in active addiction are in the workplace. Mm-hmm. I also know families struggle. Not being able to talk about what you're struggling with is not a benefit for a company. Being able to say what your limitations are, being able to talk about things, that's protective factors and risk mitigation for a company.
Yeah, no, 100%. And first of all, I appreciate you starting off by stating you're somebody in long-term recovery. So I do want to give people a quick background, and I want to learn a little bit more about you as well. What led you to the work that you're doing today? Before we dive into what that is, I'm curious of how we got here.
Well, I fell over a baby gate in 2009. I had a 5-month-old and a 2-year-old, and I had 3 surgeries in a year and a half. And as a lot of people in the United States can attest to, pain medication, not only numbed my physical pain, it numbed emotional pain. So I was in active addiction for 8 years. And then in 2017, I lost my best friend to suicide because she couldn't tell her family that she had a lapse in her recovery. And that guilt just, it ended up causing me to try to take my own life. And then when I woke up, I was like, I need to make my life matter so that we can remember her life and so that no one else has to struggle with that pain. So that happened in 2017. And, I had to rebuild my whole life. I know how important working is. I'm a single mom. You have to make an income. It's where you spend a lot of your time. So that's why the workplace is important.
And that's what's led you to this point of, I think the word passion is sort of an understatement for what you have. And from what I've seen, you're constantly reading up on the newest data that's coming out. You're looking into ways that you can implement healthy living styles and healthy coping mechanisms and tips and all different types of different modalities into the workplace. I know that we spend, what is it they say, like 8.5 or almost 9 hours a day at work. And we technically are actually spending more time at work than we are at home with our family, besides sleeping, of course, with our family, with our friends. So it's sort of the primary place that we exist in our culture. So the work that you're doing is so important. So the passion that you have for it, it's bred from you being a mother and from you having some experiences at work where you felt like cultures weren't appropriate, or what's made you have this fire specifically about workplace and introducing mental health topics to it?
Well, I think that it's an area that's often ignored, and there's just so many people that you can reach from the workplace. If we really want to make a difference, then reaching where the people are at, especially before they get to extreme crisis like where I was at. So I was working the whole time I was in active addiction. If I was able to talk to somebody, in the workplace where I was at, maybe things would have been different. My friend was also working. If she had been able to talk to her workplace, maybe her situation would have been different. So I really think that, there's different populations that we talk about all the time, but the overall public and where people are at gets missed.
Right. Why do you think it is that this topic gets ignored in the workplace?
I think that people don't realize that everyone around them is also struggling. It's a lot more common than people think. And since they don't talk about it, they don't realize when you start talking about it and people raise their hand, then you see it's affecting everyone. And we just ignored this when we could have come together for solutions. So I think it's stigma, shame. It's the way we've always done it, or, you're not tough if you talk about it, all those things.
Okay. So maybe some outdated belief systems that are there as well. I know 30, 40 years ago, you talk about mental health in the workplace and it's like, you're weak, get out of here, you're crazy, you've got a problem, you don't belong here. You got to check your emotions at the door when you walk in here and you just work. And I think as more research has come out, we're seeing that that's just not humanly possible. We're humans outside of the workplace and we're humans inside of the workplace. And how have you seen cultures shift when they start introducing some basic mental health practices or starting to take care of their employees?
I think it's a culture change. From what I've seen, I'm part of the community of practice for recovery-friendly workplaces. And just looking at the data, listening to people that have implemented the programs in different states, they said even the people that aren't in recovery, the culture is just tremendously improved. Productivity is improved. Like I said, people show up for you when they know what they can show up and how they can help you. And if we don't ask or we don't tell people how to show up, they spend so much time wondering, why is this person acting differently than they normally do? Or, when you just have conversations, it really helps.
So even by having conversations, you're saying like starting the topic of the discussions of introducing mental health and introducing the idea of substance use disorders and helping to educate people on these topics within the workplace. Is that where you feel the change process begins within a workplace culture?
Yeah, and I think we hear a lot of people talking about it needs to be the top down and it needs to be leaders. And I'm not disagreeing that it needs to be leaders, but if your leadership isn't doing it, there's ways to do it from the bottom up. You don't have to have a title to be a leader. There's affinity groups that have been created in organizations to talk about stuff. They the APA came out with a report in 2022, the Workplace Wellbeing Report, and 11% of people said that their workplace had people trained in mental health. 94% of the people said it was effective, and 45% said it was very effective. That blew EAPs out of the water, that blew even insurance coverage that covered behavioral health. And think about how inexpensive is it to train someone in mental health first aid or, basic training. You don't have to be a professional to be able to help navigate someone or to open these conversations.
That's such a good point. And I definitely want to touch on that a little bit more. But first, I want to say hi to a couple people. And, we do ask everybody who's on here right now, if you don't mind commenting, asking questions, you'll definitely get to the questions when we can. But let's just keep the chat lively and post any thoughts that you have. We'll definitely read them off and introduce them as part of the topics. Adam in the chat said, just attended a seminar on vicarious trauma in the addiction field, which brings up a couple different points. One, the vicarious trauma piece, I think, is something a lot of people who work in any type of mental health setting we deal with, where it's, you could talk about it in different ways, but putting it simply, it's when you're helping someone through some of the trauma, or you're hearing about these incidences that has occurred in their life day in and day out, you almost can't help but absorb some of that energy, and that energy lingers on you. And that's why it's constantly talked about that self-care in our field specifically is so important, that we must be doing our own work throughout it. In the 12 steps, they always talk about, you always want to get a sponsor who has a sponsor. It's the same idea for me. It's you always want to work with a clinician who has a clinician, who has a therapist. There's a constant unraveling that we have to do, and sort of energy release that we need to do in order to remain present in the work that we do and remain effective.
And I think people don't realize vicarious trauma can be from the news. It can be, we had a 12-step group in our area that had a domestic violence situation that went into their meeting, and it affected everybody. But then when they came and talked about it at meetings later, they're also giving that vicarious trauma. And first responders, it's the same thing. When people aren't trained on how to talk about trauma, they don't realize that they're spreading it too. So having some of that awareness is so important.
Well, and you think about vicarious trauma, and the greatest example we have is what we just all lived through, is the COVID-19 pandemic, all of the news that was coming out, all of the death that was around the world, people having issues with their jobs, with their home life. There was so much that happened as a result. We're going through sort of a financial crisis right now that's causing a lot of problems, and we're constantly hearing about it. And that energy really comes over to us, and we start to become like secondhand traumatized, essentially. And there's so much that we can go into with that piece. But I think specifically going back to the topic of this is that this is where I feel like employers and leaders are not recognizing, or sort of kind of have blinders on to say, like, okay, I know that we're all going through this. We're all going through this together, but my employees are still expected to produce at the amount that they're producing. They're supposed to be effective in their jobs. They're supposed to show up with a smile on every day, collaborate with everybody in here, communicate openly, do all of these things. And they're not really taking into account the humanity that each person walks into those walls with.
And I think too that a lot of times with care, we do this cookie cutter thing where you need to do it this way. And, I know that you guys focus on, person-centered recovery and then recovery-oriented systems of care. It's the same thing with the workplace. Like, your workplace might be different than somebody else's. So what works in that workplace, addressing it might not be what works. I've talked to construction companies about doing axe throwing because it's different than maybe what teachers would do, but it gets out stress, it's team building. So I think, recognizing you have a different culture in your workplace and adapting is important.
Right. And I think that's where hiring you almost need an outside professional to come in and to take a look at the organization and look at the changes that have to be made. And then it's almost like you start off with triage. What can be fixed immediately? What's going on right now culturally that's wrong, that needs to be fixed and changed immediately? Then what changes can be implemented or systems can be put into place long term so that we can maintain the culture and have a healthier culture. Let's use the word 20 times in one sentence, long term. And the benefits of that are enormous. So I'm wondering if you could maybe speak to some of the benefits of having this type of cultural shift, or what can employers and leaders expect if they do introduce this type of cultural shift?
Well, the data shows improved productivity. It shows that people stay at their jobs longer because loyalty is really built on relationships. It's not built on data. Everyone thinks it's built on, a pay amount. And I mean, you have to have an amount to live. But once you get in that certain range, you stay where you feel loyalty, where you feel like you belong. And belonging is huge. And so many people do not feel like they belong in their organizations right now.
Yeah.
If you want people to come together in teams for different projects, you want productivity to increase, you have to make everyone feel like they belong. And that's a big benefit.
And it speaks to the generational differences. I think part of what's going on now and what we're seeing is that a lot of organizations are still operating in a way that caters towards older generations. And they haven't really shifted towards what the newer generations require, which isn't necessarily the pay, which of course there are higher demands for pay nowadays. People are recognizing what they're worth more than ever, for the most part. I think some people are still asking for a little bit more than they need, but it happens. But what really is the most important, and all of the studies have shown this and the data proves this, that people really want to feel like they're contributing to something greater than themselves. They want to feel like they're building something in society that's making a difference. That's the most important piece. They want to feel a part of a team and of something bigger than themselves. And if everything is siloed in the workplace and it's like, you're just doing your little job and you're going to get paid for it, I'm going to work you to the bone, and you don't have to know what's going on over here, what we're working on big time, or the changes we're trying to make, there's no motivation to continue. And it really just ends up taking a toll on the person, stressing them out, burning them out.
And I think the other thing too is that leaders don't see everything from where they're at, and other workers only show them some of. So when you incorporate everyone within the organization and you come together to create a culture where everyone belongs, your organization's stronger because you're hearing from all different parts of your organization, from the bottom all the way to your senior leadership that you might talk with all the time. But there's gaps that different people see because of their, specialized area. And when you bring everyone together, that strengthens organizations. It also prevents a lot of this stuff. If you think about what a suicide does to an organization, when you lose somebody that you care about, that affects your whole organization, whether you see it at that time. It could be months or even years down the road, but that's going to affect the organization. There's safety planning that can be done that prevents things. If you have an active shooter in your workplace, do you have a plan for mental health support for those people that were involved? Those are easy things to incorporate.
They are. They just sort of seem to, especially when we referred to earlier, there's a bit of a financial crisis going on. Not a bit. There's a big financial crisis going on, and everyone's sort of preparing for this recession. And what's in response to that, what most organizations are doing is now cutting back. And I hate to say this, but the first place that they're cutting back is like the DEI teams, the wellness teams. HR is getting cut back. And it's the crucial teams are, not the crucial teams to the employee culture are being nixed to save a buck. And it's a very short-sighted view, and they're not recognizing that by doing that, they're actually increasing burnout. They're increasing the possibility of mental health concerns growing. They're increasing the potential for all types of incidences in the workplace related to mental health, quitting. They're increasing their need to start to rehire, to train. They're losing money left and right, basically, by doing that. So they think they're saving a buck and maybe they're winning the quarter, but they're not thinking long term. And in a couple quarters later, they're going to really start to feel the effects when things start to go really sour in the workplace because they got rid of those people.
I agree. And I also think that we talk about even disability. The number one disability in the United States is mental health conditions. It's related, so it includes mental health conditions and substance use disorder. So when we make a place where those people can thrive, we're saving taxpayers' money. We're saving our organization from insurance cost increases. And there's drug-free policies that you can get discounts on your insurance. So if you want to save some money, drug-free does not mean you're not recovery friendly, because recovery friendly is not the same thing as saying it's okay if you are using substances illegally in my workplace. Right. Actually, you probably haven't. If you incorporate people in recovery, they'll probably lower the use in your organization because people that have been there can spot it a lot quicker.
Right.
So, like when you have those policies, it saves you money on your insurance. So I think that we talk about this all the time and, we can't hire people in recovery. They're a liability. I'm telling you, I'm in recovery and this is the issue. This person over here might not be telling you what their issue is and you don't have any idea. Would you rather hire the person you know what to look for and know how to support them, or hire the person you know nothing about and is not authentic and honest enough to tell you?
Yeah, no, you're so right. And what I love too, and I think it was the Department of Labor came out with some studies about hiring people in recovery. And it was just so cool to see that they take less sick days. They're more reliable in the work that they do. They're more productive. They actually contribute to positive shifts in the culture. It was really like a moment of pride as somebody who's also in long-term recovery. It was really nice to see that. I think as stigma gets reduced around it, I think people will start becoming more open to hiring people in recovery. And as this data gets out, the issue is that it's sort of siloed and it's not getting out as much as it should. And even when it does get out, and here's an issue that I've faced a few times of going to organizations and presenting on this topic of substance use disorders in the workplace. And it's not just how bad they are, but it's a lot of offering solutions and information of the benefits of making some shifts that caters towards people who've had substance use disorders or who are struggling, and taking care of people who are struggling. I mean, the amount of loyalty you create to the organization and the amount of safety that you create, which is one of the most important things right now to create in a culture, by taking care of your employees who have struggles and allowing them to come back and supporting them on their journey, the benefits are enormous. What I've seen happen is that they allow people to come in and educate the staff, educate the team. Senior leadership doesn't show up to those educational events. They're busy doing their job and they don't want to show up. And no changes actually end up occurring. So they hear this stuff. It's great. Oh, I'm so glad to hear this. You've educated us. We're breaking down walls here. We're taking care of our employees because we're having somebody come in and educate. Well, no, you have to actually take action after education. And that's where I'm seeing a lot of employers fall short.
Yeah, and I think that maybe if they realized what they already had within the organizations.
Right.
Every organization has somebody in recovery. I can guarantee it. There's over 20 million of us in long-term recovery in the United States. That's like the population of Florida. Yeah. We're everywhere. It's just we're not telling you. So if you create a place where they can talk about it, and then you add in mental health conditions, 1 in 5 people struggle with a mental health condition. So that's, 1 in 3 families are affected by either substance use disorder or mental health conditions. So, I mean, when you add all these things together, it's everybody. Mm-hmm. So when you don't want solutions, but you already have this within your organization. So it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. And then also include in that, if you do have family members that are struggling too, the effects that that has on your productivity. I think there's like a 42% decrease in productivity if you have a loved one at home that's struggling. So there's so many different aspects of this that have to be addressed. Before we move a little bit more into the solution, Amanda, my business partner, who's a total badass, came in here and she commented, she said, "Hi, thanks for discussing such an important topic." She said she feels no better place to have this type of discussion than on LinkedIn. Let's keep breaking stigma. How can someone start being part of the change? So we'll get to that for sure. And then Sarah, who also works with us, said, "Hi, Blake. Hi, Ashley. Thank you so much for speaking on mental health wellness in the workplace. Working as a nurse for 14 years, I always had to shut off my emotions, regardless of what was happening personally and also professionally, such as a patient dying, difficult patients, etc. I believe this is one of the reasons for my continued substance use disorder and depression and anxiety. It's such an amazing feeling and healing piece to work at a company who knows how important mental health is." That's awesome. And Amanda then commented again, "Exactly, Ashley. We are team focused to better serve our clients." And it's something that next level we've implemented is that we are actually not client centered. We are team centered. And we do that strategically because we know that if our team is taken care of, they are going to be better at taking care of our clients and taking care of the people that we're serving. But if they're burnt out, exhausted, and they're not there, then there's no way for us to be client-centered. We can't take care of the people we're dealing with if our cup isn't full. So we have to constantly monitor each other. There's been many times where Amanda has made me take a day off, where we've made Sarah take a day off, where we've made Amanda take days off, and the whole team, where we've had to really cater to whatever their needs might be.
And I think that's an important point that you just brought up. You don't always know when you're struggling. When you can open up and have a conversation with your team, and your team is trained to look for these things, they can protect you, which also protects the organization. And there's different industries. I mean, the rate for suicides in medical professionals is through the roof right now. It's, there's the safety issues in construction.
Mm-hmm.
There's more people dying of suicide and substance use disorder ramifications than the big four combined, which is what all the safety stuff focuses on. So if these issues are, creating bigger problems than what your safety plans are built around, maybe it's time to reassess.
Yeah, I agree. I know my wife is a lawyer, for example, and I know lawyers are struggling with some of the highest rates of suicide, highest rates of depression, anxiety, substance use disorders. And I feel as if, I will say outside of her firm is great. And I'm sure there's plenty of other firms that are really great in this way. But for the most part, the law field almost seems like it's the furthest behind in terms of shifting cultures. It's almost like a good old boys club. And it's very, shut your mouth, do your work until you're the senior attorney, and it's sad to know that they haven't caught up with the times.
And I think it's just that perfectionistic culture, and that, nobody messes up and you have to have this image. And, most people think people that struggle are homeless, and that's the narrative that's told. And that's not really the case. I mean, you're twice as likely to suffer from a substance use disorder if you're a CEO of a company. The law field's huge for it. Same thing. So suicide rates correspond with income levels. Actually, the higher your income level, the greater your chance, to die by suicide. And substance use disorder, the higher achieving, the greater your chance. So maybe change the narrative.
I think Biggie had it right. More money, more problems. And it's true. There's more pressure that comes along with a higher paying job. Has more pressure. There's more expectations of you, and it leads to a lot of other issues. So I do want to dive a little bit into some more of the solution. So what are some things? What are some mindset shifts that leaders can take within organizations that maybe they have some different viewpoints of how, if they brought in this idea of taking care of their employees' mental health or fixing the culture What are some mindset shifts that you think need to happen first? So let's start there, where maybe their thinking is off about this type of topic or what it means to introduce mental health, stuff that caters to employee mental health. Maybe how can we shift that? And what have you seen in the past? And what would you like their perspectives to be?
I think the first thing is to talk to your people. Everyone assumes they know what the people within their organization want. And very rarely do I see people actually ask the people what they're struggling with or what they need. And 81% of people, say that they're going to be looking at mental health for their future jobs and careers. So that's something businesses really need to pay attention to. Yeah. Ask your employees whether they would like to have somebody come in for lunch and learn and talk about mental health, or whether they would rather have a foosball table or whatever the case may be. Just, give them a say.
Are you saying that a foosball table doesn't fix addiction? I'm confused.
Well, I think that people learn a lot more, and there's relationships built in connection that you don't get from a foosball table. You might play with somebody here and there, but after that first week, that novelty wears off. So if you're going to invest the money into something for wellness anyway, why don't you invest in something that has a longer benefit? I mean, I've never heard of a foosball table that has a return on investment of $4 for every dollar. And that's the least amount actually that I've heard for a return on investment for mental health. So
yeah, I think honestly, that's the biggest selling point for any organization. And that's another mindset shift right there, is that by adding more value to the employees in terms of mental health benefits and taking care of them, there's a 4x return on investment at a minimum, which is a huge ROI. That is enormous. So that needs to be considered all around. A 4x is not usually, that's a very hard ROI to achieve. So that has to be recognized first and foremost, I believe. I also think a couple of the pieces that I've seen as well in terms of the perspective or what it means to have more mental health benefits is, one, that it's going to all of a sudden create some culture where everybody's going around crying, people are not showing up to work, that everybody's going to have some type of mental illness that's running rampant in the organization. Like, that's not what any of this means. This means adding preventative measures, adding helpful ways for employees to blow off steam, not just events that are surrounded by alcohol, but helping to prevent burnout. This is implementing systems where people can feel safe and comfortable to seek help, and creating cultural shifts long-term so that we are not creating this environment of fear and we're creating more of an environment of safety. That's really what it looks like.
And I think that's an important thing to point out, is we're trying to build a culture of psychological safety. And if you have somebody in your organization that's going to take advantage of you trying to build psychological safety and wellness within your organization, then they're probably not right for the culture you're trying to build. So if they are making up diagnoses or missing all the time for years on end, and then maybe they weren't right for your organization, and getting rid of one person for the benefit of everybody seems to make sense to me.
I agree. I think people oftentimes place too high of a value on somebody's productivity. Like, let's say that they're an excellent salesperson, right? They're bringing in the most money, but they are also the most toxic to your work environment. It is not worth it. Just because this person's making you a lot of money, you're losing a lot of money elsewhere. So you need to be able to take a holistic view at your organization and see where are the weak points, where does the toxicity lie, and be able to clean house a little bit there.
Yeah, and I mean, like, Simon Sinek's done stuff and talked about it with Navy SEALs and, high performers, and how that there's a sweet spot to get to. But you want to know who is actively, contributing to productivity. It's normally not your highest salesperson. It's normally not the person that the leader thinks is leading. Again, ask your people. Who can you depend on? Who shows up for you? Maybe their numbers aren't as high because they're helping other people improve their numbers. And in the long run, the company's numbers are higher. I think that's a shift too that needs to happen.
Yeah. Speaking of Simon Sinek, and we've talked about this a couple of times in our messenger, but there's a book that really changed my perspective called The Infinite Game, where he's really talking about almost exactly what's going on right now being wrong, of trying to win the quarter and not thinking long-term. And by making cuts and making decisions based on how do we profit just this quarter? How do we profit just this year? And they're not thinking about the lasting effects that they're having by taking some of these measures and the effects it has on the employees in terms of stress and burnout. So we talked a little bit about a mindset shift that has to occur. I think that has to change first. I think the other mindset shift that has to occur too, that by introducing a mental health friendly culture doesn't mean you're turning HR and turning everybody into therapists. All the managers don't need to become therapists. They don't need extensive training. There's just I think a little bit about what you talked about, mental health first aid, and then just some basic tools and techniques that they can introduce to help the flow of communication and to help create some of that psychological safety. And a lot of team building, I think, is another really important piece. What else can managers or leaders do, in your opinion? What are some of the basics that you feel that can be done at relatively low cost to help improve the culture?
Creating an environment where they don't use stigmatizing language is a huge thing that's easy.
I'm sorry, I missed what was it?
Stigmatizing language
Okay.
And narratives. I had someone the other day that told me he told his boss that he had to leave on time. They'd been late every day that week. He had a doctor's appointment that he had to get to. And he's like, oh, yeah, right. It's probably a hot date. And he said, no, I have to go to my psychiatrist. I take medication for my bipolar disorder. And if I don't make this appointment, it'll be 3 months before I can get back in and I won't be able to get my medication. And his supervisor said, oh, so you're one of those crazy people that's going to come up and shoot the place up, and told everybody in his workplace that they needed to watch out, that he was one of those crazy people. So we really need to watch our jokes. I mean, that's not a joke, but I mean, even when we're laughing and joking and using some of these stigmatizing terms like crazy, and we really need to watch what we say. And
that's lawsuit level right there. That's really bad. Wow. Talk about the damage, and also how that shuts him down from the future. He'll never want to admit to somebody else that he's got this issue and what he's actually going to get help for. He'd rather say he's going on a hot date and leaving early for it.
And he's doing everything he needs to do. He's going and seeing his doctor. He's taking his medication. There was no reason for that.
Yeah, that's egregious. That's pretty bad. Before we continue on, Reb, who's somebody I love, lives out in Malta. He's a great person also in recovery, doing some of the work that we're doing. He wrote, in Canada, companies continue to conduct annual appraisals with decisions already made by management before the interview. Managers continue to listen to employees, but do not change the behaviors. Listening is important, but actions are vital. What do you think? And I think that's a bit of what we touched on earlier, is that, the overall theme, I think, of all of this is that you can't just say you're mental health friendly. You can't just say you're a employee-centered workplace. You can't just say that you're inclusive. You have to actually be that, and you have to actually listen. And just because you put up a mask or build a house of cards, eventually that's going to come crumbling down, and you're not actually going to improve anything. Person may feel good for a minute, but if they get back to their desk and they're bombarded with emails and added pressure, and that them talking about all the pressure that they feel at work to their manager just minutes before, they're not going to feel any better about the situation just because their manager gave them a pat on the back and told them it's going to be okay.
Well, and like I said before, we're putting it all in leaders' hands. So even with advocacy, how do you change laws? Is the numbers. So is your organization going to have people if there's nobody willing to stand for that type of environment? Is your leader going to have anyone to lead if there's no one left in the company? So if you work, with the person next to you talking about this stuff, the person down the hall. If you all get together and approach it, respectfully but firmly, leadership has to listen, or
Right.
they don't have an organization.
Right. No, it's a good point. It's actually was one of my questions too that I was going to bring up to you. And yes, I actually prepared questions for this. I'm looking for praise. We can't always have the expectation, and I think it's unrealistic at this point in our society to expect all employers across the board, to embrace this idea. And so in the end, just like my recovery is my problem, we have to also learn as employees to embrace our own mental health concerns and be able to deal with them and do what we need to do to make the differences in our own lives in order to protect our mental health and our recovery. So what you just touched on is one of the ways of sort of working with peer to peer and being able to have open communication with other peers. Big believer that vulnerability begets vulnerability. So the more that we are able to be vulnerable, I think we can create almost like an underground culture within an organization that doesn't rely on management, where it becomes a little bit healthier. What else can employees do to take care of themselves, and how else do you see that showing up?
I think that they can see if somebody within their organization is stressed. One thing I've done is I've seen someone that hasn't left their computer for a long period of time. And I asked them, hey, do you want to go on a walk with me around the building a couple of times? I don't want to go alone. And that gets someone out in the fresh air. If there's something bothering them, they tend to talk about it, or it just gets them up and moving and breaks up that monotony. And it's great for wellness. So
Yeah.
Walks
are huge. I just saw some other study on walks too, that if you're having your certain mood, or if you've gotten very anxious or whatever it is at work, taking like a 20-minute walk can almost be like a physical way to reset your day. And there's a ton of benefits behind it. It's really interesting. So they can take care of themselves in that way and take care of each other in that way. And I think that's really important. And I do think what you said is that eventually leadership or management will catch on and start to realize, hey, this is getting better. What's changed? What's shifted? What's working here? And I talk about this often, but I think people rely on others who are actually in a titled position as a leader to make changes. But I'm a big believer that anybody can be a leader at any point. And if you're brave enough to start making some shifts in the workplace and to start implementing some of what you just discussed, of just having the smallest amount of compassion and empathy for the people around you, and being able to take action around that in a way that doesn't affect your job, but is also taking care of other people, you can really start to begin a movement within your own workplace.
Yeah, and I think, we talk about leaders, but being a leader is different than being a manager or being a supervisor. So somebody in a titled position might not be the leader of the organization. It might be somebody that's just a typical employee that doesn't have a title. It's the people that people follow and listen to and motivate the team. So I think that that's a big distinction, is you can be a leader without a title.
I agree. And I always think of this one, it's kind of like the Udonis Haslem effect, which I'm sure a lot of people don't know who Udonis Haslem is, but he's on the Miami Heat. He was a player that was there for so long, was always paid well, but was never really that star of the Miami Heat, but was there through all the different changes. And the reason they never got rid of him was because of the effect that he had on the players around him. The support that he provided to everyone there was invaluable. And leadership and management saw that, and they knew that they had to hold on to this guy who was on a championship team, who was part of that contributing to them winning finals. It didn't matter, though. They were not willing to let go of this guy because of the effect that not that he had on the court, but that he had on the bench. And so we can all be a Udonis Haslem at some point in our lives. It's just we have to be brave enough to take that step.
Well, and I think that life is a team sport, no matter how we want to phrase it. There are certain sports that are individual and individual talent. is important. Most things are team sports, and the way you build a team and the cohesiveness matters. You can have all the talent in the world. We've seen it. People buy talent on different teams all the time, and they don't win championships. And everybody's like, why? They have everything. Because they don't have everything. They have individual talent.
Right.
And, I say all the time with addiction, connection is the opposite. Same thing with all of this. Isolation. That's what makes people sick. When you build teams, when you build connection, people get better.
Yeah, I agree. I agree completely. I think Amanda and anybody else who knows me would be shocked, by the way, I just made a sports reference because I'm not the biggest sports guy. But just that story always stood out to me, that why they kept him. Speaking of Amanda, she asked, she said, oh, Blake, talk about how few people are aware of EAP benefits. And I think it's not even just EAP benefits. I think right now, there's a lot of services that are available to employees within organizations that aren't promoted. I believe intentionally it's to save money. So there's stuff that's being offered to, again, kind of from the outside perspective, it looks like we're taking care of people, but they're not really promoted within the organization because they don't actually want people to utilize them. And I think EAPs really fall within that. I think the EAP rate usage is like somewhere around 3% of employees actually use their EAP. Does that sound familiar to you?
It's low. And I mean, only 38% of people that utilize it find it effective. And I think that's because we've taken a shift. EAP used to be something within the organization, and now it's third party. And so it's a different service than it used to be in a way.
Yeah. Reb also just commented, a lot of people don't realize that they have problems in companies and they're let go straight into the wall because they are replaceable. As long as employees are seen as replaceable resources and not as people who can make the company grow, the issue will remain difficult to address. I mean, enough said, right? Like that's such a great point. And again, that's that fear mindset, the psychological fear that's created within a lot of organizations is like, your job is never safe. You can be replaced at any moment. You are not of value. You are just here to complete the work that we give you, and that's it. And that is not a healthy culture.
Well, the amount it costs to hire a new employee to replace somebody when they could take care of the person they've already onboarded and trained, and it financially doesn't make sense. But I mean, that's that fear mindset that sometimes managers put in people's heads, that you are replaceable. And within your organization, maybe that position is replaceable, but people are not replaceable, period.
Yeah. No, well said. I could talk all day about that. Actually, I'll keep it moving. So we just have a few minutes left, and I think there's a couple more topics that I think that we should probably talk about, or a couple little tools that we can implement. So first, you talked, we talked a little bit about some of the shifts that can occur within the workplace. There's something that I've heard you talk about a number of times, and I think it's really important too, is the peer-to-peer, or the mentor relationships and the peer-to-peer groups within the peer support groups that can be created within organizations. Can you speak a little bit about that, and what does it look like logistically? And then also, how effective is that?
Well, so I'll use the example, construction is a huge hire, they hire second chance a lot of times. So, and a lot of times people transitioning out of prison or jail have a substance use or mental health condition. We know that that's the largest provider of those services. Having somebody within the workplace that identifies and has some training, do you think that person is more likely to succeed if they're paired up with somebody that is willing to tell them, hey, I've struggled with this, and say, hey, let's go to dinner, or let's go to a movie, or going out with coworkers drinking after work when they already have that struggle? Everyone wants to belong. They might not want to drink, or they might not want to hurt their chances of doing well. But if they have to belong,
Yeah.
that,
Well, So the idea is to have somebody, if you create internal networks or internal systems and maybe support groups, and allow it to be peer driven, is the idea, where it's a sort of a safe place where people can go and talk about some of the issues that they're having and like receive the support that from other peers within the work system.
Well, and it also can be used in different ways too, like mentorship. So it's been shown to have great, results on people's careers. If somebody in the organization identifies with lived experience with substance use disorder or mental health condition, or a family member that's been through that before, they can mentor somebody that has that. If people know where to go because people are open with their lived experience, then they can navigate them to services, navigate them to just conversations or how to advocate for themselves, or, hey, you really need to tell management about this because it could cause X, Y, and Z. So, we talk about, wellness, recovery action plans. And I think that doing that in the workplace for people that struggle with mental health conditions and substance use disorder is so important. Who do you go to talk to when you're struggling? What do you look like when you're struggling? And then when you have people with lived experience that can identify that and you feel safe talking to, then they can identify those things. And it doesn't necessarily have to be upper management or HR.
It goes back to something you said before, that connection. It creates connection at work. It creates like feelings of safety. You feel like you're a part of a society or a culture at work. You feel a sense of belonging, knowing that you have support through your peers at work. And the way that I've seen it done in the past is usually one or two peers who maybe are in recovery, or maybe have struggled with some type of mental health concerns in the past, or maybe who are dealt with burnout and dealt with it successfully and developed some type of coping mechanism that's healthy, are empowered by leaders to say, hey, after hours and maybe 6 p.m. when everybody's on their way out, you can use the big meeting room and you guys can have a support group, and you can feel free to promote it however you'd like. We'll send an email newsletter blast to all of the employees, let them know that this support group exists. I've seen other employers actually support the process by bringing in a clinician at first to allow the groups to operate and sort of help give structure to the group. I've seen employers offer some group facilitation training to just a couple of employees so then they can run it. And by offering the groups, of course, it has the effects to everybody who attends, the positive effect to everybody who attends, but you're also think about the feelings that you're providing to the people who are facilitating, that you've empowered to take on this role. You're making them feel really good. You're making them a loyal employee because they're feeling empowered by the workplace. So the more that we can create these types of inner systems, the better the long-term results of the entire organization is going to have.
When we talk about resilience, like that's one of those buzzwords in business lately, is resilience. If we want people in our organization that are resilient, they're probably going to have struggled with something at some time. And if we empower them and help them create that self-confidence, that it's okay that you struggled, you're doing all this to help the next person struggling. Like, are we not building resilience within our organization by letting people feel empowered?
Right. That's such a great way to put it. Well, thank you. I appreciate you coming on here and dropping the mic a few times and spreading some knowledge. I appreciate all of this, and I'm glad that we finally got to have a deeper conversation about this. And I hope that we can continue to do so and see how we can maybe implement some changes in Florida to some of the organizations that are operating right now. I think the biggest thing that people need to recognize on this topic is that it's not as complex as it sounds. For organizations to make the changes are actually fairly simple. They just have to be willing to make those changes and be consistent in the changes that they make. And I think it will begin to have a snowball effect. Over time, you will start to see the benefits grow and grow and grow of implementing changes in the workplace. Simple stuff, simple training, simple peer-to-peer networks, whatever it may be that you decide to introduce. I think you will see the benefits for years and years to come.
Yeah, once you let people tell their stories, you'll be amazed at how many stories there are and how many things how much people have overcome.
Yeah. The last thing that I'll say, and I kind of want to end it with a story that I actually told on Amanda's LinkedIn Live, but my first time ever giving a presentation about substance use disorders in the workplace, where I was nervous as all hell. I had all these different ideas. I actually wasn't as well researched as I probably should have been, but I went into an organization with a few ideas of just basic stuff to help them grasp an understanding of substance use disorders, what they are in general, what do the symptoms look like, how do we support those people, and then how can we create some cultural shifts to help people who need help to actually get that help, to help them feel comfortable doing so. And one of the ideas that I had, so first of all, it was this giant tech company in New York City. So I'm even more nervous now. It's my first presentation. And then everybody who shows up, there's probably like 130, maybe 150, 60 people there that are crammed in this small room. It's like standing room only. And I'm like, holy crap, this is my first time doing this ever. And I am now really scared. I hope I can make an impact. At one point, I started talking about the idea that vulnerability begets vulnerability. And the idea that a lot of times and oftentimes it's easiest to start implementing these changes when leadership does get vulnerable. Like, yes, we can do what you talked about, and employees can take charge and be vulnerable themselves and start creating change. But if a leader does it, it really speeds up the process. People start becoming open. So I'm talking about that idea, and a hand goes up, and I call on the guy, and he pulls out a 90-day medallion out of his pocket. And he says, I want to let everybody know that I didn't go on vacation 90 days ago. I went to get treatment for a cocaine use disorder. And I picked up my 90-day medallion on my way to work today, and I'm 90 days sober as of today. And the whole place went into applause, and somebody kind of leaned in to me, and they're like, hey, that's the CFO. And I was like, holy crap, I can't believe he actually just did that. And then it was the most beautiful thing. All of a sudden, all these hands are going up from all of these employees, and everybody's talking about different issues that they faced, issues that they've had at home, familial issues, whatever it may be. All of a sudden, everyone was being vulnerable and sharing and laughing and hugging. And it was like the most beautiful example of how, if we're just willing to talk about some of our issues and break down the walls of this, like, who we're supposed to be at work, and you leave your emotions at the door. If we just take that mask off for just a few minutes every day, we can create such a powerful connection and a powerful wave, domino effect of people getting the help that they need, accessing the help they need, and relief of some of the burnout and issues that they're dealing with at work.
Yeah, well, secrets and shame make us sick. And who doesn't want to be able to come to work as their full self every day and not have to hide who they are? So, I don't want to have to pretend to be someone else. It's a lot of work. So being able to take those secrets and shame away is powerful.
Yeah. I don't know about you, but I know that when I was in my active addiction 10 years ago, like, that's all I ever did was pretend to be someone else. Mm-hmm. And I don't want to have to feel that way. And, I think I'm lucky to work in the mental health field, because sort of everybody, you're surrounded by therapists and people who are caring and empathetic and always are digging a little bit deeper, probably too much, probably some boundaries being crossed, but it's still, I feel fortunate to be in this, but I have to recognize that that's not the reality in most worlds. In a construction place, I'm sure it's really hard for guys to get out there and start talking about their feelings. So we have to start creating that culture that allows for that in whatever way and however it looks for each type of organization and field that they're working in.
Yeah, and celebrate the things that make us vulnerable. I mean, we celebrate dads and being a good father. Being a good father involves feelings and loving your child. So there's nothing wrong with love or not knowing what to do when your child's struggling. So I think embracing and celebrating, I don't want to celebrate when someone's family member is struggling, but celebrate you love your child and you're willing to ask for help for them.
I think celebrating asking for help is the key there, right? It's giving somebody the response of love in return and compassion in return is how you celebrate that. And I think that is so powerful for people. If they know they're not afraid to ask for help at work, you're already starting to create that culture of safety, psychological safety that we talked about. So thank you again for coming on here. We do have one last thing that I decided that I want to do with everybody, is that I want to give you an opportunity to nominate somebody else to come be on the Workplace Wanderer show. And you can think about it, but I think I would love an opportunity for you to nominate somebody else that you think would be a good fit to have a discussion on topics like this that are related to the workplace.
I know who I'm going to nominate.
Do you want to say it out loud? Do you want to call them out?
Cheryl. And I'll give you her information. You already have her information, but she would be great.
Okay, cool. I'll reach out to her. Amazing. All right. Well, thank you again so much for taking time out of your day to do this with me.
Thank you so much for doing this and raising awareness.
I'm going to keep at it. Like all of us, we all got to work together. All right. I'll see you later. Bye, everyone.